Out in the middle of the vast Pacific Ocean, there's this tiny little speck of land, just an island. But it holds a story that is, well, it's almost impossible to believe. It's a story about unimaginable riches and, just as quickly, staggering loss. A legacy that's literally carved into scarred, barren rock. This is the incredible story of Nauru.
So here's the central question, and it really does sound like something out of a fairy tale, doesn't it? How did this tiny island, we're talking just over 10,000 people, an area you could walk across, become the single richest country on the planet per person? And then, how did they lose it all? I mean, everything, in what felt like the blink of an eye. To even start to understand that, we need to go back to a time before the money and, before all the destruction.
Okay, so part one. Before we can even get to the tragedy, you have to picture the paradise that was lost. I mean, before the mines, before any of the money showed up, Nauru was completely its own world. It was so idyllic, so beautiful, that the first European captain to spot it back in 1798, he just gave it a name that fit perfectly: Pleasant Island.
And really, this whole thing is a tale of two completely different Naurus. On one hand, you have the island as it was. Think a vibrant, thriving ecosystem covered in coconut palms, with this beautiful freshwater lagoon right in the middle. But then, there's the island today. Just look at that. It's a moonscape, a desolate, jagged lunar landscape. And get this, a staggering 80% of the island is now just gone, stripped bare and left completely uninhabitable.
For something like 3,000 years, this was a totally self-sufficient place. The Nauruan people, they were organized into 12 different clans, which, by the way, is what the star on their flag represents today. And they built this incredible, unique culture all on their own. They even figured out this amazing form of aquaculture, raising milkfish in their lagoon to make sure they always had food. It was a life in balance. That is, until the outside world found out what was hiding just under their feet.
And that discovery, wow. It was going to bring Nauru wealth that was just beyond anyone's wildest dreams. But it was also, tragically, the beginning of the end. Let's talk about the billion-dollar rock.
So what was this incredible treasure? Well, it's something called phosphate rock, and it's basically fossilized bird droppings. Seriously, thousands and thousands of years of seabird droppings, or guano, that hardened into one of the purest, richest phosphate deposits anywhere on Earth. Now, why does that matter? Well, phosphate is a super key ingredient in fertilizer. And for a world that was rapidly industrializing and needed to grow more food, Nauru wasn't just some island anymore. It was a literal gold mine. And once that discovery was made in 1900, things started changing fast. For a while, the island got passed around between different colonial powers. But the real turning point, the moment everything changed, was 1968. That's when Nauru finally gained its independence. And, this is the most important part, they took full control of their own phosphate mines. By the 1980s, the money wasn't just flowing, it was a tidal wave. Just stop and think about that for a second. The money pouring in from digging up this one rock made the people of this tiny, remote island some of the wealthiest on the entire planet. We're talking wealth on par with oil sheiks in the Middle East. At their peak, they had one of the highest GDPs per capita in the world. For a little while, it really looked like the ultimate fairy tale had come true.
But here's the thing about a resource like that. It's not infinite. It runs out. And that dream of endless wealth, it started to crumble. And when it did, the true, catastrophic cost of all that prosperity was laid bare. This is how paradise was truly lost. 80%. That number, that's the physical price they paid. The vast, vast majority of the island's interior was just scraped away, leaving behind this horrifying, barren wasteland of sharp limestone pinnacles. It's a ghost of the forest that used to be there. The very land that made them rich was gone.
And then, of course, there was the financial cost. Now, to their credit, the government had set up a national trust fund. The idea was brilliant. Save the money, invest it, and it would support the Nauruan people forever, long after the phosphate was gone. At its peak in 1991, it held over $1 billion. Just a decade later, it was basically gone. It had just evaporated. Over 90% of the country's entire savings vanished into thin air.
So, where did $1 billion go? Well, it's a tragic story of total mismanagement, a series of absolutely disastrous investments, and just pure squandering. Get this, the nation's trust fund was used to finance a big musical in London about Leonardo da Vinci. It was a spectacular flop. They had to sell off their prime international properties like the famous Nauru House in Melbourne.
just to pay off debts. It got so bad that eventually their national airline, Air Nauru, had its one and only plane repossessed.
It's so tragic, but economists actually have a name for exactly what happened here. It's called the resource curse, and Nauru's story is, unfortunately, the textbook example. You get this sudden, overwhelming flood of cash from one single thing, and it creates an economy that's amazing at spending money but has no idea how to actually build a real sustainable future.
So now the phosphate is all gone. The trust fund is empty. Nauru is left completely adrift in the Pacific. Imagine that. A nation that literally had everything was suddenly forced to figure out how to survive with almost nothing.
And that search for a new way to make money, well, it led them down some pretty dark roads. First, in the 90s, they tried becoming a tax haven, which quickly turned into a hub for illegal money laundering. Once the international community cracked down on that, another, even more controversial opportunity came along. They started taking aid money from Australia in exchange for hosting a deeply controversial offshore detention center for asylum seekers.
But maybe the most devastating consequences of this whole boom and bust story are written on the bodies of the Nauruan people themselves. When the money came, their traditional diet of fish and coconuts was replaced by a flood of cheap, imported, processed foods. And the result? A health crisis of catastrophic proportions. Today, Nauru suffers from the highest rate of type 2 diabetes on the planet. More than 40% of the population is affected. That's just unbelievable.
And if you think that's bad, the stats on obesity are somehow even more shocking. The World Health Organization has found that Nauruans are, by far, the most overweight people in the world. Look at these numbers. 97% of men, 93% of women, classified as overweight or obese. It is a full-blown public health emergency, and it was born directly from that economic collapse. And the environmental damage? Well, that's now a permanent part of their reality. With almost all the farmable land gone, pretty much all of their food and fresh water has to be shipped in on boats. The phosphate runoff from the mining poisoned the surrounding coral reefs, killing off an estimated 40% of the marine life. It completely crippled their other main traditional food source. The island simply cannot support its own people anymore.
So that leaves us with this one huge, profound question that Nauru is still wrestling with every single day. How do you build a future when your past has been literally hollowed out? When your land is gone, your money is gone, and your people's health is broken, what do you do? Where do you go from there? The story of Nauru, it's more than just about one island. It's a powerful and, honestly, a terrifying cautionary tale for all of us, about the real price of wealth that's taken too quickly from the earth.